Hello and welcome to Direct Supply's Continuing Education webinar series. Direct Supply offers monthly webinars on a variety of topics throughout the year. The topic for today is Managing Legionella in Senior Living. My name is Robin Malik and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Please note, the information contained in this presentation is intended to provide general information but not advice about certain regulations and initiatives. This is not intended as legal or other advice, and each situation may vary depending on the particular facts and circumstances. You should not act upon this information without first consulting with qualified legal counsel. Today's webinar will be presented by Thompson and Brian Waymire. Thompson is Managing Partner of Innovative Water Consulting and Chief Compliance Officer for Legionella Management Plan Solutions. His experience and fascination with Legionnaire's disease began when his father was hospitalized and diagnosed with the disease in 1989. 25 years later, he is one of a limited number of business leaders specializing in risk management of Legionella and other waterborne pathogens. Rye's work provides workable solutions by merging science-based data with realistic, everyday requirements of on-site staff. Brian Waymire is also Managing Partner of Innovative Water Consulting and Legionella Management Plan Solutions. Throughout his 15-year tenure in the water consulting business, Brian has worked alongside leaders in the industry, gaining invaluable knowledge and water treatment expertise. He also assisted developing and managing a patent-pending method for saving water in cooling tower applications. Brian has been immersed in the Legionella space for his entire tenure in the water treatment industry. From laboratory testing, interpretation of test results, client education, on-site remediation, and water management plan generation. Both Brian and Rye hold degrees from Purdue University, and they both have a passion for aviation. They enjoy flying airplanes and traveling to the off-beaten path locations in their free time. And now, please welcome Rye and Brian.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Thompson. Thank you for the introduction, Robin and Direct Supply. And welcome to Managing Legionnaire's Disease in Senior Living. We're going to take the next 50 minutes approximately of your time to go through just 28 slides. So this will not be death by PowerPoint. That's important to us. If you're calling in today and not following along online on the webinar, then we're going to speak to you as well so that all the information can be garnered in the easiest available way. Today we're going to go over what is Legionnaire's disease. And just like baking a cake, you have to start off with the dry ingredients. This is a bit my task on this. So the first 14 slides today will be the dry ingredients of this cake. I'm going to talk a bit more of the actual disease itself, how it's caused, symptoms, how it's treated. And then we're going to shift gears about halfway through it. I'm going to hand over the reins to my business partner, Brian Waymire. And that's where the rubber meets the road. And you're going to learn more about how we actually treat it, how you're able to take action inside your actual buildings, water management plans, talk about the CMS mandate that came out June of last year, just 9 months old, and the stuff that is directly important to you in your facilities and your organizations. And Brian will also cover water management plans at the end of that. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Thank you very much for your time today. I know it's lunchtime for a number of folks. If you're listening in during your lunch hour, we here at Legionella Management Plan Solutions want to give you accolades, and we thank you for your interest in this disease and in the treatment of Legionella. We know there's a lot of anxiety around Legionnaire's disease itself, and it's through this webinar and through this education that we hope you take away information that provides you with more comfort discussing Legionnaire's disease, discussing Legionella, that's the name of the bacteria, in your organizations and in your buildings. So here we go. Legionnaire's disease is a serious lung infection most commonly caused by breathing in water droplets containing the Legionella bacteria. So for much of this presentation, you're going to hear me talk about Legionella, Legionella, Legionella. That's the actual name of the bacteria that lives in the water. That's what we test for when we do testing. That's what doctors test for when they do a urinary antigen test. It's a bacteria. It's a waterborne bacteria. It only lives in wet surfaces. And that's why we're talking to you today as we come from the water treatment world. And so part of our burden and our expertise is handling this actual waterborne bacteria. Now, how does this actually cause disease? And what's the history behind it? Slide number 4 here is the only history lesson for today. Many of you are aware, but if you're not, this is where Legionnaire's disease came onto the actual scene. It was the first recognized outbreak of the disease occurred in 1976 among attendees who went to a Philadelphia convention of the American Legion, and that was at the Bellevue Stratford Hotel. And you had a number of elderly men who were members of the American Legion come to Philadelphia during the bicentennial of the country for a week-long event with their American Legion. They stayed at and they had events in the Bellevue Stratford Hotel, which is pictured there on the slide to the left with yours truly. That photo was taken in the last couple of years. And then they returned home to all sorts of different communities in Pennsylvania. And many of them came down with a pneumonia and perished and actually died. And it was an unknown disease at the time. There were a total of 34 deaths and 221 people who were sickened. So this was a very scary time because people could not figure out why these people got sick. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, investigated, and you talk about anxiety. It took 6 months, pardon me, it took until December of that year, and just around the Christmas holiday, there was actually a scientist for the CDC who went into the lab on Christmas Day as they were getting closer and closer to identifying isolating what the bacteria was that had caused this form of pneumonia. So 6 months after this outbreak, they isolated the bacteria and they named it Legionella after the American Legion members. So that's where the name Legionella comes from. It's called Legionnaire's disease. In the medical world, it's called Legionellosis. There's two forms. You have Legionnaire's disease, which is the more severe form, and then you also have Pontiac fever, which is a less severe form. So what are some of the causes of Legionnaire's disease? Well, what I want you to take away from today is that you get this through a bacteria, and that bacteria has to be ingested into your lungs, and you'll see that here in a few slides. The inflammation it causes a lung inflammation, and it's caused by the bacteria. Generally, the condition develops 2 to 10 days following exposure. So what are some of the symptoms of Legionnaire's disease? It primarily affects the lungs, but it can also cause infections in the heart. That is rare. The following symptoms are typical on the first day or two. And the reason that we go through this in our education piece, and like I said, these are the dry ingredients of this cake that we're baking for you today, is because every single person that works in a senior living home or any home or building with a complex water system, so this is also hospitals and hotels, is susceptible to this disease. So this is important because you could get it. And one of the questions we want to answer, if you get it, how do you properly treat it? Can you pass this on to your family members or other people in your organization? So what are some of the symptoms? So this speaks a bit to, say, the nursing directors and the nursing staff who are part of the caregiving staff that are listening in on the call today as well. A high fever, often 103 to 104 degrees, chills, cough, muscle pains, and headaches. After the second day, more symptoms can emerge, such as coughing up mucus or blood, shortness of breath, chest pain, vomiting, increased feelings of confusion. What's important to take away here, and I'm going to get to this a little bit further down the line, is that sounds like a lot of diseases or a lot of infections. And so we want you to be aware that just because somebody's coming down with pneumonia, what could possibly be case in a pneumonia in one of your facilities, or you or a family member, what I want you to ask is, what type of pneumonia? Or could this possibly be a bacterial pneumonia caused by Legionella? Down there in the red box, I like to say that the time between the patient's exposure to the bacterium and the onset of illness is 2 to 10 days. And we see this a lot where somebody has contracted it somewhere else and then they come back home. Oftentimes, this is tracked because travelers oftentimes will bring this home from somewhere else. And in fact, the case of my father, who contracted Legionnaire's disease at age 43, he had traveled overseas in the week previous, and we lived up in rural Connecticut. And 2 days after he had come back from his trip, he was in the hospital, in a pretty small hospital in Northwest Connecticut, and I have to give it to the medical staff there. There was quite a bit of anxiety at the time for my mother and family because we were unaware of what was causing this disease. But I do give it great credit to the doctors at the time, and this is 9 years after it was discovered, that actually were able to determine that it was Legionnaire's disease, and then they were able to properly treat. We'll get to that in a few more slides. How do you get infected with Legionnaire's disease? Well, first, the good news. Finally, there's some good news, and Brian always says, hey, Rye, you need to tell some people that there's some good news about this. The good news is most people who are exposed to Legionella don't get sick. Those that do become sick are usually infected through aerosolized droplets. And you're going to hear me talk about that a little bit more. What does that mean? Micro droplets, a aerosolized droplet, that all means a small droplet of water that the bacteria is actually in, that it travels to come into your lungs. So a great example is turning on the hot shower in a cold bathroom. You're going to get that hot vapor. We all love that. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy. But it's that vapor that this bacteria can actually ride on as you inhale, and it goes into our lungs. It then seeds in your lungs and actually causes legionellosis, this disease. So here's a real takeaway point here on slide 7 I want you to be aware of. A lot of folks know that Legionnaire's disease, or they associate Legionnaire's disease with cooling towers. However, common infection sources, and you're going to see the very first one, this affects every single building that you have residence in, is showers. This is the most common infection source, are showers. So the takeaway for you is this is in potable water. That's your hot water and cold water, but predominantly your hot water systems that run around in your buildings and are used for showers in your buildings, also used in your beauty parlors if you have beauty parlors. It's at that point in time that someone who's showering or getting being showered, if you're using tub rooms, depending on your skilled nursing facility, that they could inhale this droplet and be infected with this bacteria. Other common infection sources are swimming pools, hot tubs, and whirlpools. Less common in the senior housing arena, but we do have buildings and we do have clients who have those features on their campus. Water fountains, I think folks in the industry is coming out. If you do have a water fountain in your facility or in your lobby, it's definitely time for you to question with your organization, your leaders, your leadership, your maintenance staff, is this necessary? I believe it's an undue risk, so it is something that you want to put on your to-do list if you have a water fountain or some sort of water feature in your building right now. Cooling towers, yes, they are and have been credited with forms of with causing Legionnaire's disease. To that end, most of your buildings do not have cooling towers. But then we go into complex water system, which would be any hospital, nursing home, hotels, a large building with hundreds of feet, thousands of feet, and even miles of feet of piping is the perfect environment for this bacteria. The bacteria exists in nature. It's in water sources, it's in ponds, it's in streams, it's in little puddles outside of your house or wherever you're sitting right now. But it never finds an environment where it can really grow in large numbers. The environment that it really likes to grow in large numbers is inside complex building systems. That's a great environment. The heat, the temperature's at the right temperature for it to grow. There sometimes are areas of low flow. And then on those pipes, there's biofilm, and it loves to burrow into that biofilm. And when it does that, it can seed an entire building. If you are in the Midwest or if you're from Illinois and you're on the call or any of the neighboring states, you may be very aware of the Quincy VA hospital that has been dealing with a number of cases of Legionnaire's disease for years now. And even though they've installed many different, they've taken steps to prevent Legionella inside the system itself, and they've done that through installation of some very fancy and expensive systems to help treat their potable water, they're still having outbreaks. The reason is those pipes in that building are over 100 years old, and the biofilm on the inside of those pipes is likely so thick that the disease cannot be eradicated. Who's most likely to get Legionnaire's disease? As I'm moving on, I just need to check my time and be a better time manager here. Most people who are exposed to Legionnaire's disease don't get sick. Again, that's some good news. But the following folks are generally more susceptible. People who are 50 or older. That's why we're on the phone call today. People who smoke, people with chronic lung disease, people with weakened immune systems. However, approximately 1 in 4 cases of Legionnaire's disease occur in otherwise healthy individuals. So what's the more good news when it comes to Legionnaire disease? Well, the good news is it's not contagious. So people are getting this from water, from that water droplet that they have inhaled that goes into their body. It is not contagious. So says the CDC. That's an important takeaway. So if you happen to come down with this, doesn't have to worry about taking this home to their family. How do you know if a patient has Legionnaire's disease? So how is it tested in the medical community? This is, again, important to the caregivers, and I really want you to be aware. If you have a resident who has pneumonia, it might be, it is advisable to really determine, well, what kind of pneumonia, what kind of bacterial pneumonia? And the disease can be confirmed by doing a chest x-ray accompanied by a physical exam. There are some lab tests that can be done also, but the most important one is the urinary antigen test. This is an actual test of urine. It takes about 15 minutes, and that actual test looks for one molecule. It looks for a molecule of the Legionella bacteria to determine if it's Legionnaire's disease. Now, there's a caveat of this. The medical community only tests for one family of the species of Legionella, and that's Legionella pneumophilus serogroup 1. I'd like to pause there for a second. That particular strain of Legionella is responsible for over 80%, 80 to 90%, depending on which scientific document you want to read, of Legionnaire's disease cases. So that's what the medical community tests for. If you try to culture out a piece of sputum or a specimen of sputum from somebody, that takes over 5 days. And the implication there is if someone has a pneumonia and you treat with a normal common antibiotic or the incorrect antibiotic, you could lose valuable days in trying to treat the disease because, I'm going to move on here, Legionnaire's disease must be treated with the appropriate antibiotic. It cannot be treated by some of the very common antibiotics like penicillin. So again, this is from CDC and the medical community. Of course, the disclaimer here is I would urge you and your nursing staff and any administrators to, of course, consult with the medical community. But the two most effective classes of antibiotics for treatment of Legionnaires are the macrolides, azithromycin, which many of us are familiar with, and the quinolones. So those are out of the floxacin, ciprofloxacin, levofloxacin, moxifloxacin, gemifloxacin, and trovafloxacin. And I thank my Purdue pharmacist friends who have taught me how to properly say those over the years. Here we go with some good news finally. Can Legionnaire's disease be completely cured? Well, if it's not treated promptly and effectively, again, that's the importance of properly identifying it. It can be fatal, especially if your immune system has been weakened for any reason. Most victims recover, but between 5 and 30% who get the disease do die according to the CDC. And the reason there's a variance there is actually you are much more likely to die if you acquire this disease in the hospital setting than if you acquire it out in the community. It is a nationally reportable disease. Even one case of it in your facility is reportable. Brian will speak to a little bit later on. 2 or more is an outbreak, but those are just some of the terms of how CDC defines a Legionnaire's disease outbreak. And here, as we start to bake the cake, I say, so now we get a more critical ingredient today. I'm going to add some eggs in, and then we're going to hand it off to Brian. Why is this important to us? Well, the cases of Legionnaires' disease are rising exponentially. And you'll see this chart only takes us up through 2015. And when it comes to CDC numbers, they're usually about a year or two behind in reporting, in arrears, what these cases are. So the graph until 2014 showed that it was increasing by nearly 4 times. Now we take it up to the June 2017 CDC report, and it's now increasing to 4.5 times. And the implication for all of us that are involved in senior living is this. More people are aware of this disease, just as you are, which is great because now we're able to actually properly identify it and better treat it. But with that, because this disease has been massively underdiagnosed over the years. So these numbers are increasing because people are properly identifying. With that, unfortunately, comes along greater litigation as more folks, and I talk about the legal community, are coming back to the organizations where people have lived and said, hey, why did my Aunt Millie contract Legionnaire's disease in this facility where she lived? So the fact that the cases are rising exponentially is a combination of increased litigation, people asking for more tests that's post-mortem, and while someone is still alive to properly treat it, and the fact that it is being reported more often. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand over the reins to my business partner, Brian Waymire. Brian is a visionary, and I really commend him. A number of years ago, he came to me and said, hey, Rye, we need to talk about Legionella. And I said, Legion what? And he said, Legionnaire's disease, what your dad had. And I said, yes. I consider him a true visionary in the water treatment space. He has said, let's take information from the scientific community, from the regulations and monitor the regulations that are on the federal, state level. He's also said, let's go out and look at what the rest of the world is doing. And he saw this coming. And so with that, I want him to introduce to you some of the more where the rubber meets the road, talk to you about water management plans, the CMS update.
Yes, once again, everybody, thank you for today, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to learn a little bit more about Legionella. Okay, as Rye said, baking the cake, yes. Then we've learned about what Legionella is, what the bacteria is, but why are we here today? I think most of us probably have known about this since June of last year. The CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, came out with S&C 17-30 revised on June 9th. This was in accordance with the CDC released a new revised report on Legionella. The big deal about why CMS came out with this is, as Rye had spoke about, is the reportability of Legionella and the 4.5 times rise as of 2017 in reportable cases. CMS is Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. We all know, the residents that you deal with, a lot of them are Medicare and Medicaid patients and Medicare and Medicaid reimbursables. So I think we are thinking that the reason they did this and they came out with this CMS mandate is because of the exponential rise in reportable cases and the cost involved with it. Someone say, I think the normal cost with hospitalization for Legionella-related pneumonia is somewhere in the range of $50,000 to $60,000 per occurrence. Here's one thing I want everybody to know. We're going to talk about water management plans here very shortly. We're going to get a little bit deep into it, but not kind of a broad overview. And we can't really give you everything that you need to know about a water management plan to devise one, but we are going to talk about what CMS is looking for, what the CDC has provided, and also what ASHRAE 188 is, and which at our company we call that kind of our Bible or our handbook of how we go about doing our business. So according to the CDC, 9 in 10 cases of Legionnaire's disease were caused by problems preventable with more effective water management plans. What they're saying is, the CDC says, as Rye also pointed out, with that building in Illinois, the veterans home that's had all these problems, they have now done everything correct, and they are still having issues with Legionnaire's disease. So the CDC even stated, they haven't put it in print, I can't tell you exactly where it is, that they have done everything right. There's still a 10% chance that you can contract the disease in your building. The Legionella bacteria grows best in buildings with complex water systems. Facilities can protect their patients' health by utilizing a water management plan to reduce this disease. We just talked about that, and I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth on what it is. So in a nutshell, to break it down, we are going to talk about ASHRAE Standard 188. It is a risk management approach, and I'm going to read this because I think it's very, very important, to controlling the risk in building water systems to exposure of Legionella, especially if the Legionella growth goes unchecked. I remember Rye talked about that biofilm. Think about that. The building is 100 years old, and the biofilm, in other words, the bacteria has come in from somewhere. In other words, it has to come in through your municipal water system, and the pipes have grown, scale or corrosion or any of those types of things. And the water in low flow areas has built a bridge, is what I call it, the easiest way to think about it. And that bridge, under that bridge where the water is not flowing freely, has grown that Legionella. And if you have a interruption in your water at that point, so say you have a water main break, or somehow that line gets heated up and that biofilm breaks loose, then that Legionella will proliferate through your building. So ASHRAE 188 is this document and this standard that was designed to help prevent this. It is a comprehensive and can be complicated and requires continuous action by the building owners and managers. That is why that is in red there. It is very important. Building owners and managers have the ultimate responsibility for the residents, the staff, and everybody that comes into your buildings, is what ASHRAE has stated. So the purpose is to give you the minimum requirements of a Legionella risk mitigation program. Quick scope is, we're dealing with potable and non-potable water. And what I call for non-potable water is, for instance, if you have a water fountain or a decorative fountain or a cooling tower. We'll talk more about cooling towers a little bit more, and the risk factors. In other words, what is in your building that causes the highest risks to your team members, residents, and staff? So the elements of a water management plan, this is what they're asking you to do. This is what ASHRAE 188 is asking you to do. And if I haven't said, ASHRAE actually used to stand for something, but now they say it's just ASHRAE. But what it used to stand for is an American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. The people who put together this 188 was a 30-member group of experts from all around the country, engineers, Legionella bacteria experts, that came to a consensus where this used to be a guideline, and now it is a standard. So we'll talk about litigation and risk as we get a little bit farther, but this standard is now what everybody is basing, including the CDC and the CMS mandate. And I'll speak about the mandate here in a second, but it actually references everything. ASHRAE 188 is that controlling document for everything that you need to know about water management plans. The Water Management Plan team is concerned stakeholders, so senior organizational leadership, facilities maintenance staff, infection control, nursing, etc. Ryan and I always speak about this. This is very big. Everybody has to work together. So the people on this team have to be, have a common goal and a common plan to mitigate the risk of this disease. And validation, we'll also talk about this a little bit later also. This is always a big one. Testing for Legionella or monitoring of Legionellosis. Well, we're a very proactive company instead of reactive. So we advise our clients always, and this is, all depends on who in your organization, upper level management, how they want to handle this. But what we always say is, it's better to know than not know. So we always recommend our clients to do testing to verify that their plan and the validation side of their water management plan is actually working, instead of, oh no, now we have a risk of Legionella in our building, or we had an outbreak, which Rye spoke about earlier. One is a reportable event. Two, based by the CDC, is considered an outbreak. So, like I said, proactive versus reactive, and your organizations or your team members can figure out how you would like to move forward on that one. Okay. According to the CDC, water management problems can lead to Legionnaires disease outbreak. This is kind of a big one. And bullet point number 2, about 65% are due to process failures, like not having a Legionella water management plan program. And look at the next one. 52% of the outbreaks are due to human error, such as hot tub filter not being cleaned or replaced as recommended by the manufacturer. There's these things called control measures, and we'll speak to this here in the next few slides. Control measures are a very big deal. The control measures are what you put in place in your building via a water management plan to reduce this risk of Legionella. And as I said, litigation, it is actually becoming very, very hot now. Ryan and I think at last count, there was over 20 law firms that their entire practice is Legionella risk or Legionella litigation. So in other words, what did you do? Did you do it correctly? And I'm always going to put that. Always you want to do it correctly, because if you don't do it correctly, you do open yourself up to that litigation and that risk of what we call negligence. And I'll speak to that a little bit more. Okay, CDC water management program is based on ASHRAE 188. I know I touched on this a little bit earlier. The slide on your left, it says a Legionella water management plan program consists of. We'll talk about that in a second, but if you actually look at the very bottom of it, this comes straight from the CDC toolkit. Source, ASHRAE 188, Legionellosis Risk Management for Building Water Systems, dated June 26, 2015. So that's when that ASHRAE 188 document that I speak about became the standard instead of a guideline. So what we have to do, and this is what ASHRAE states, and this is also what the CDC states, and this is what CMS is actually looking for. We'll also talk about a couple of instances, real-world instances where I've ran into surveyors. What are surveyors looking for? Are they looking for this, that, or that? And what we've had very unstandardized is what we have ran into is because everybody's learning. This is new and it's coming out. But I will say this: surveyors are getting much wiser. They're getting their education, and they are actually now knowing what to look for. And it is that ASHRAE 188. How is this built? So I kind of skipped the other slide, but this pretty much takes care of the exact same thing. Components of a water management plan. You have to identify persons responsible for the development implementation of this water management plan. This comes directly from ASHRAE. The program team. We talk about this, and I think November 28th of 2019, CMS is going to require an infectious disease control person in your building. Well, ASHRAE also breaks that out. They actually do say if you fall under a certain criteria, you have to have these type of people on your program team. And it's an infectious disease controller. It can be someone with a PhD or master's level in infectious disease. You could have a industrial hygienist, so on and so forth. And that's actually broken out in Annex Annex A of the ASHRAE 188 document that describes what you need in that program team. So we have some good slides on the next one. Describe water systems and flow diagrams. This is a big one. The goal of this is describe the potable and non-potable water systems within the building and on the building site and develop water system schematics. It's kind of a twofold process, and we'll talk about that in the next two slides. But what you're looking for is a generic, it doesn't have to be extremely detailed, but what you want is a roadmap of how water enters your building, where it goes from the street all the way to the sewer system. And the reason they want to do that is because if you ever are to have an outbreak, you want to make sure that someone comes in and can say, oh, here's the highest risks of outbreak or of infection. What do we do about it? That is why they have done that. And then the next part is analysis of the building water systems. Evaluate where hazardous conditions may occur in the water systems and determine where control measures can be applied. We'll talk about the control measures next, but that's the big one. What can we do to reduce this risk? And, like I said, 30-member group, this is, it's due to be a full rewrite at the end of 2018. I think at the end of this 2018, they're going to rewrite ASHRAE 188. So it is going to change. It is always changing, and that's, part of our business is making sure we are compliant with this. But talking about it today, I just want everybody to know on this call that the document will be changing, and it does change often. So control measures. So we talked earlier about, Rye talked about cooling towers and decorative fountains and hot water systems. Those are risk factors. The highest risk factor would be, and ASHRAE breaks these out separately, hot tubs or spas. Those are the ones, they define that as, do they drain the water every day? If it's a shower tub, like we've seen in many of our clients' spaces that you actually drain every day, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a hot tub that the water is, you have in there with chlorine and it's hot and your residents use it and the water is not drained every day. In other words, that water can stay in there for 3 to 6 months before it is recycled. So those control measures are locations where control must be applied and maintained in order to stay within established control limits. I have a pretty good example of control measures. We'll go through this as we go forward, but that's basically what we're looking for. Where are your risks and what can we do to mitigate those risks? And then ASHRAE also has you monitor and for corrective actions. So what this means is, okay, you have put a control measure in place for this risk. What do we do if someone forgets to do it? And that's the big one, is the corrective action. Establish procedures for monitoring whether control measures are operating with established limits, and if not, take that corrective action. So within your control measure, you have to have a corrective action if you cannot maintain what you were supposed to do in the original part or the original monitoring side of the control measure. And then confirmation. This is the big one. Establish procedures to confirm that the program is being implemented as designed. Verification. And the program effectively controls the hazardous conditions throughout the building water system. Validation. So this is all in ASHRAE, and this all has to be documented, and documentation is the next part. But the confirmation part is, remember we talked just a couple slides before about proactive versus reactive, okay? Did we test? Did our tests come back and verify that we do not have Legionella in our system? Now, I will say that, the test alone is not a given, and it's usually a trend that we're looking for. As we test over time, is the test coming back still in the same range and or better? Last, documentation. Establish documentation and communication procedures for all activities of the program. We'll talk about this here in a second, but it's a living document. This document will always change, and the CMS surveyors are now actually looking for the documentation piece. So when you have a water management plan, you just can't put it on your shelf and what we call shelving it, say, hey, we did something, but then you didn't follow that plan. So now, no longer you did something, so you're not negligent, but then you knew you had to do something else, so now it would be called doubly negligent. And I don't want to scare anybody, but that is what the attorneys are looking for, is if you ever have something in your building happen, okay, did you do everything that you were supposed to do? Okay, inadequate flow diagram. This is kind of what we've seen a lot of these, okay? And this is just one example of 30 or 40 that we have seen that have come to us for help, is you see how all it does is just point out where, the risk factors supposedly are. It doesn't say where the water's coming from. It doesn't say, if you have fire suppression, all these things that it doesn't need. So this is kind of an example of what you don't want. The next one, and this came directly from the CDC toolkit, is what you do want. If you look on the side of it, you have receiving, cold water distribution, heating, hot water distribution, and waste. So what we're looking for here is, like I said, that generic roadmap of risk factors in your building. And if you look at it, so receiving, where does the water come from? And the reason they want to know that is, okay, if you have a Legionella outbreak or a Legionella outbreak in your building and you have some people that get sick, you want to know where the water came from. It's a 4-inch pipe from Maple Street. And it tees off and it goes to your fire suppression, your sprinkler system, and then it drops down to what we call cold water distribution. And you see how it's actually pretty simple. Then you have a cooling tower on your roof. You have a decorative fountain in the lobby. You have ice machines on floors 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. You have sinks and showers on floors basement through 11. You have a hot tub on floor 1 and pool on floor 1. Those are all risk factors. So what they're asking you to do is say, okay, where does the water go once it gets in on the cold water side? And then we get down to our heating side. Okay, the water now goes from the cold water, it goes to heating. So we have water heaters, number 1 and 2 are in the basement, and it's very important that we have locations on these. And there's also water heater number 3 in the basement kitchen, and then you have a hot water storage tank in the basement. Those, once again, are all risk factors that have to have a control measure assigned to them. And then the distribution. Okay, this makes perfect sense if everybody thinks about it. Sinks and showers, and kitchen appliances. And then finally, where does it all go? It all goes down to the sanitary sewer. Could go to a storm sewer. It could be recycled for gray water, but for the most part, it does go down to sanitary sewer. That is what the CDC is looking for. That is now actually what the CMS surveyors we have talked to are looking for. That is a proficient and a very good detailed flow diagram. So now we're going to talk about that infamous control measure. And I'm going to kind of go through this somewhat quick because we're running a little bit short on time. I got about another 5 or 6 minutes before I have to head this up. Control measures are actions and or activities that are taken to prevent, eliminate, or reduce the occurrence of Legionella bacteria. So I have an example of one. And, for instance, a risk factor for a dead run. The control measure is flush and drain if possible, ideally remove dead legs or amend to allow for water circulation along with unused equipment and water lines from the system. Eliminate or minimize the use of rubber, plastic, and silicone gaskets in the plumbing systems. These materials may serve as growth substrates for microbiological growth. So that's the control measure. Then you have a location. Where is it in the building? A frequency of the task. This needs to be done biannually. Monitoring. So identification is key. Identify dead legs and either remove or drain biannually, perform the control measure task. And the corrective actions. It's kind of a big one. As you learn more about Legionella, you will learn that there is a temperature that Legionella grows, and it's actually most acceptable to proliferation, as however you want to say that. Is from 68 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to 122 degrees Fahrenheit is your greatest risk. So hot water systems are the biggest risk for the growth of Legionella. So that's why, dead runs, a corrective action for a dead run is to raise the temperature in your building, if you can, to above 158 degrees Fahrenheit and flush. That would actually kill the Legionella. It will not grow at that. So another part, and I want to talk about this, of a very good water management plan is your contingency response plan. Every water management plan needs to have this in there. If it does not have this in there, then it is not a compliant with ASHRAE 188 Section 7 is actually where this comes from. Is you want to make sure that local and state authorities are your governing of your Legionella. What do you do if you do have a outbreak and or a case of Legionella in your building? And you need to have this in your water management plan, because if you don't, we are over to this. There's no longer a choice. Members of the worldwide scientific and regular communities agree that building water systems should be managed to minimize Legionella. So what we talk about, and this is what we go to our customers and tell them about doing this correctly. And I don't want to scare anybody. I just want to make sure everybody knows doing it correctly is the right thing to do for your staff, for your residents, for your company, for a long-term safety in your building, because you don't want to have high cost of litigations, having to deal with your insurance companies. It's a very big pain, loss of business and possible brand damage. And we want to make sure our residents are safe and they do not become sick. And like I said, there is a 10% chance if you do everything correct that you could have this in your building. But what I do want to say is at least you did do everything that you were supposed to do, and you can feel good about that. I do say all that, loss of business and possible brand damage. Usually these will always, if you have an outbreak of two or more, usually will end up in the news pretty readily with your company's letterhead or logo on the front page, and you really don't want that. So I'll talk about this living document, but remember we talked about at ASHRAE 188 that you have to document. CMS, they are getting better. This was new of June. They started actually looking into it in November on their surveys. Documentation. That is the big part. That is what CMS is going to be looking for. Some of them are, it's not standardized yet, but they are getting better. They will be looking for that documentation in your water management plans. And we advise all of our clients to print out their water management plans, and we update them PDF-wise is any time that we get an update or change in ASHRAE 188. And just so you do know, a quick one, once we're back to that documentation, that living document part of this, ASHRAE 188, this document has already been addended 5 times. So there's already been 5 changes that you have to keep up with. This living document, please, whatever you do, do not take, however you get your water management plan, however you come by it, however you want to do something with it, make sure you don't shelve it. Make sure that you follow the plan as written. Make sure that your program team is educated, that they know what they're looking for. That's why we started out, as Rice says, baking this cake. That's why we started out kind of with, the bread, the eggs and the batter and the flour and the salt and everything that you needed for what is Legionella, and then what do we do with it. So we gave you a little background on, part A, and then we're kind of getting toward Z. In other words, what do? We have to make sure that document is always up to date. It's ever changing. Like I said, 2018, they're due for a whole another rewrite. Guideline 12 was done in 2000, so it's 18 years old. It's due for a complete rewrite. Rye is actually going to be participating in questions on the board for ASHRAE with Guideline 12 and ASHRAE 188 2015. So we're right at 25 minutes, so we are, let me see here, make sure we're at, 152, so we're pretty close. The next thing we're going to go is to questions. I'm going to let Robin take over, and hopefully she's more technologically savvy than me. I apologize. There is a ton of information, and like I said, our entire business is based on this. It's one side of our business, but it is a very big part of our business. And we can't give you everything in 50 minutes, and I apologize. There's probably going to be a ton of questions, but we try to give you a broad overview of CMS mandate, ASHRAE 188, and what we can do as good stewards of our company and to promote healthy environments for our residents, our staff, and the people that visit our buildings. Robin, I'll let you go from there.
All right. Thank you so much. Yes, you are correct. There is a lot of questions. Rye, this question was from your portion of the presentation. They're asking if you were referring to drinking water fountains or decorative fountains.
In that particular case, I was talking about decorative fountains, but drinking fountains does fall under potable water. But decorative fountains, the ones that might be in a lobby that have water going up, a little pump, and a little bit of spray. Those are the ones I was talking about.
Perfect. Thanks. What about other sources like CPAP machines, humidifiers, etc.? Are they also at risk?
Okay, great question. They are at risk, and they're specifically bullet pointed in the CMS mandate. And the way that that an organization deals with that, and the guidance, the scientific guidance is, clean and maintain in a working order according to manufacturer's instructions. And that's actually, Brian touched upon it, talked about the documentation part. One of the requirements to comply with ASHRAE 188 is to actually have and maintain the instruction manuals for the different devices you have in your facility. So the takeaway there is, yes, for these individual machines, if you have hydrotherapy equipment or CPAP machines, bronchoscopes, heater-cooler units, you want to get those actual manufacturer's instructions, and those documents actually become a part of your water management plan. You need to be able to put your finger on, where can I find those directions? Does that answer the question, Robin?
Yes, excellent. Thank you. All right. Brian, this one came in during your portion. Is the periodic review annual or quarterly or another time frame?
That's a very good question. And actually, the review, the stated review in ASHRAE 188 is the program team should meet once yearly to review the water management plan. Now, I want to speak to this also. If they're asking a little bit of a different question, so I'm going to kind of answer two questions in one. ASHRAE 188 does change. So we recommend our clients, we check it every 30 days. There's actually an expiration date on our water management plans, and we make sure it is updated for our clients. I'm not trying to put a sales pitch for anybody. I'm just saying it does change often. Like I said, it's been addended 5 times, and I think Rye could speak to this in the last 2 years.
That's correct.
It's constantly
Brian,
changing.
I do have something to say about that one, Brian. Yeah, as per ASHRAE, it does specifically state that the periodic review has to happen at least every 12 months with respect to have there been any changes in your building. But it says if there's been any changes, that's additions that have gone on, you need to have a review of your water management plan. And then there's also certain events that trigger the water management team getting together to make sure that things are going correctly. And the big one that we're seeing right now, and it's going to continue to increase, and it affects every single building, no matter what you have in it or who your residents are, just about every community in the United States is going to be affected by changes in water pressure due to water mains being replaced. As we go into this period of our water infrastructure in our country being replaced, those are high likelihood times for your building, which may not have any Legionella at all, to get seeded with the Legionella because it actually exists in those water mains throughout the cities. There's a case of that. The big case happened in Flint, Michigan, when they switched over their water from the Great Lakes over to the Flint River. The big issue there is there was drop in pressure, and by changing that water source. So again, you could be doing everything right in your building, crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's, managing your water management plan. But if the water coming into your building produced by your municipality changes, either by where they're getting the source, or if there's changes in the chlorine levels coming in, or water main breaks or interruption of services, and this is the one I'm drilling home, that is a time for the program team to actually get together and say, hey, are we doing everything necessary, and are we at risk? Maybe this is the time that we do want to do some additional testing now that we've had this water main break in our city. We want to test this week, and we want to test 2 weeks from now.
And the follow-up, document it. Make sure that you write it all down.
And then is there a specific number of samples that you should take each time?
Oh, Rye, I'll let you handle that one.
Great question. And so the answer to this one is no. I could never say that there is a specific amount of samples that anyone should take. And this is because every single building is unique. That's why a program team gets together and makes a flow diagram for their particular building. I can't issue you a flow diagram that covers your facility because I don't know what your facility, only the program team does. And it's based on that information that the program team determines how often they want to test, where they want to test.
Yes, and right.
And we spend and Brian will chime in here, we spend a tremendous amount of time educating clients. ASHRAE 188, our standard document, does not specifically require testing. And that's because it took them 15 years and 5 public reviews just to issue the very first standard. And it was a large working group of 30 different players, and they couldn't come to consensus on testing itself. But you fast forward to June of last year, CMS has pretty clearly said, we want to see what testing protocols you have in your water management plans and document the results of testing and corrective actions that are taken when control limits are not maintained. And that is right. Directly out of that CMS mandate. So I can't give you a specific number. That's where you need to consult with someone, with your water treater or with your water consultant or the person that's making up your water management plans and come up with a game plan going forward together.
And last thing, right, and then I know we're getting a little low on time. ASHRAE says if you're going to do testing, you have to have procedures in place in your water management plan for testing. So make sure that is also done because you can't just go and test if you don't have procedures. In other words, they want to say, what do you do? okay, yeah, I need to test. Where am I going to test? How am I going to test? Who's going to handle it? So on and so forth. And that's actually specifically stated in the ASHRAE 188 document. Sorry. Go ahead, Robin.
That's all right. There's a couple questions here that are coming in that are kind of related. What's the best way to test? Who does the testing? What kind of test kits do we use?
Okay, I'll take the first part of that. So testing can be done by taking a water sample of, there's two types of different water that runs through buildings. We have utility water. That's water that's running through cooling towers or used for heating systems. In the case of a cooling tower, we would test that water by actually taking a sample. It's about a 250 milliliter sample. A bottle is what we send to our clients. They actually take a sample of that water, put a cap on it, and that gets sent to a lab, but just not any lab. We use CDC-approved elite labs. These are labs that have specifically met a standard for testing specifically for Legionella. And that is also stated in the CMS mandate. So you can't just send it to any old lab in your neighborhood necessarily. As far as potable water, which is the water coming out of your shower head or your drinking fountain, same way that the water is actually taken into a sample. It is sent to a lab where the lab cultures it out. It takes about 10 to 14 days. There are other products on the market. They are not. We do not recommend at our company, and they are not approved. Or CMS is very clear. They say use an elite lab. An elite lab will culture it out. So if you go online, you might see something like, "Hey, Legionella test in 15 minutes using this little test." I wouldn't waste my money on it. And as far as complying with CMS, it's just not. It just doesn't work for your industry.
All right, excellent. I'm gonna do one more question, and then we're gonna jump over to the next portion of the webinar. So last question: if I have a chiller boiler system, is each individual unit that water flows through in each patient room at risk?
Okay, I'll take that one. For instance, let's talk about a boiler. Remember I talked about those temperatures. Well, if you're using a boiler, usually it's a hot water recirc boiler that is usually not open to your residents. It's usually a closed loop system that recirculates water. And if this is, like I said, if this is a hot water recirc or a steam boiler, I can speak to that. Closed loops are not a risk factor. I'm pretty sure, unless you have a huge break. But you have to remember, Legionella will not grow readily above 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So once we get up into the 140, 160 degree range, Legionella will die off and it will kill it very, very rapidly. So no, those are not risk factors. And then you're talking about the chiller side, so the closed loop side of the chiller, same thing. It's usually very cold water, and Legionella will also not grow at those ranges either. So there's a couple of documents that speak to this, and they actually also say that those are not risk factors. So I hope that answers your question on the boiler side of it. And if you have a steam boiler, obviously it's even higher range of temperature, so you're not going to get outbreaks. And remember, it's closed to, it's not an open source to your resident. So it's, unless you have a leak. So if you have a leak, I would make sure that you repair the leak quickly and go from there. But I can't answer all the questions on it. But no, they are not risk factors.
Now, for anyone interested in hearing about how Direct Supply can help with managing Legionella in senior living, please help me and welcome our product manager, Jack Murphy.
Great stuff, Brian and Rye. I really appreciate the knowledge that you both have been able to share today. This has been a topic that is really taking the industry by storm. There's a lot of questions out there, and even this hour that we've had today, I think, has really done a great job in helping to bring some clarity to what it is that you need to do in order to satisfy this requirement. So, as Robin said, my name is Jack Murphy, and I function as an associate product manager on the Direct Supply TELS team. Since the S&C letter was released back in June of 2017, my life has consisted of almost nothing but Legionella management. And in fact, my team has even started to call me the Legionella fella. So look out for a Twitter handle coming soon with lots of updates on there. And in fact, in January of this year, I was down at the AHR show in Chicago and got to do a 3-hour training with one of the gentlemen that put together the ASHRAE 188 document. His name is Bill Pearson, and you better believe that I got his autograph, and it's hanging in my cube right now. So this has been a topic that has really consumed my life, and I'm really excited to share today the Legionella toolkit TELS has made available. Some of you out there right now might be really shaking or not, not really knowing how you might go about satisfying this requirement. But we're here to help, and there really is no one-size-fits-all solution. So I'll walk you through the options and help you find what's right for you. So before we get into the toolkit, I'd like to take a step back for a minute and talk about TELS. TELS is a web-based maintenance management platform created exclusively for the senior living industry. TELS is available through your computer's browser or through the TELS mobile app. And TELS is used for managing regulatory and preventative maintenance tasks, work orders, and asset management. The other really cool thing is that through TELS, you also have access to a network of third-party, pre-screened to work in senior living service providers in the categories of HVAC, plumbing, commercial kitchen, electrical, drain cleaning, and then landscaping and snow removal services for those of you who are fortunate enough to live in a cold weather climate, like us here in Milwaukee. So TELS is the leader in building management with over 11,000 buildings currently subscribed and almost 1 million beds being served. So with that understanding, let's dive into the new toolkit available from TELS. So current TELS users are familiar with TELS best practice tasks. These are the most common regulatory and preventative maintenance tasks employed in senior living. With the help of life safety, regulatory, and industry experts, we've digested lengthy and complex code to understand what needs to be done, by whom, and how often. What this results in is a library of tasks with preloaded instructions, any needed logs, and even include the tag that that task helps you avoid. This allows your team to get to work quickly and accurately. So when it comes to Legionella, it's no different. We've worked with industry experts and dug through ASHRAE 188 and the CDC toolkit to create a TELS best practice task. If you have all the qualifications needed to create your plan in-house, this is really the right place to start for you. And those qualifications I've listed out on the left side of the screen here, and it will be available for you to kind of peruse as we send out those slides. So that, like I said, that is not a solution that works for everyone. And for those who fall short on the qualifications or who'd like a much easier and more turnkey approach to creating their water management plans, we have 2 really cost-effective and efficient options for you. The first option is the Smart Plan app developed by Legionella Management Plan Solutions, which is available through TELS. The Smart Plan app guides the program team through the water management plan creation process, leading them on a thorough, technology-guided tour through the building, prompting the user for critical information needed to create the plan. All you do is simply enter the information, submit the data, and your site-specific water management plan will be seamlessly uploaded to your TELS site, complete with those control measure tasks and also a detailed flow diagram. So while the Smart Plan app is incredibly easy to use, it might not be for everyone. So for those who are looking for the ultimate ease of creating a water management plan, we're offering turnkey on-site services. So once dispatched by TELS, our water treatment partner, Legionella Management Plan Solutions, will go to your facility or facilities, meet with your staff, conduct a risk assessment, and generate a site-specific water management plan. And just like with the Smart Plan app, the plan will be automatically uploaded to your TELS site with detailed flow diagram and control measure tasks added to your TELS work schedule. In addition, there is ongoing management of that plan, and it speaks to what Brian and Rye were talking about, how there are changes to that plan. So as with our plans, those will be automatically changed as things occur in your community or changes are made to the ASHRAE 188 document. So we've hit on one of the major areas of the CMS mandate, which is the water management plan. The other questions that we've had were about testing. And as Brian explained, testing is of significant importance when it comes to your water management program. And I'm really happy to say that through TELS, you have access to a full package of testing. So those of you who were reaching out asking about where do I get tests, how do I get started, we're here for you. And once we've established your testing needs, we'll automatically send testing equipment and detailed instructions to each location. And then the tests will be evaluated through the CDC Elite method, and the results will be interpreted and recommendations presented by a water treatment professional. So you're not just going to get back a piece of paper with a bunch of numbers on them where you have to sit there and try to interpret it yourself. All the results will be interpreted, and those recommendations will be provided by a water treatment professional. So these results and testing frequencies will be tracked and documented within the TELS platform for really easy retrieval and unmatched visibility. So whatever method best fits your needs for water management plan creation and testing, you can track and document all aspects of your water management program within the TELS platform. Easily manage control measure tasks and activities, store documentation, and access the interactive reporting dashboard for easy visibility into what your program teams are doing. So, if you're not subscribed to the TELS platform or have interest in any of the Legionella solutions we've talked about today through our toolkit, here's how to get started. Simply reach out to our TELS customer support team, and they will connect you with one of our dedicated TELS representatives, or email the TELS sales team directly at telsales@tels.net to schedule a TELS platform demo or get started with the tools that work for you. So with that, I'll send it back over to Robin for some Q&A.
Thank you again to Brian, Rye, and Jack for presenting today, and thank you all for watching. We really appreciate it. For more information about upcoming webinars or to view past webinar videos, please visit directsupply.com/webinars, and thank you again for attending today.